Okay, I'm going to invite Dr. Tamara Huff up. She will introduce our next speaker. Dr. Huff is a member of our board of directors and has just been amazing, particularly with all her help with renovating the website and the work on the website. Take it away.
All right, thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I am nowhere near as entertaining as Dr. Greer, but I'll try my best to get going. Welcome to day one of our summit. And my name again is Dr. Tamara Huff. I'm an orthopedic surgeon, owner of Vigio Orthopedics, a board member of Movement is Life, and actually a prior history major. So I was very happy to hear the humanities in Dr. Greer's talk. It is my great pleasure this morning to welcome Ariel Belgrave, an award-winning health and fitness expert, wellness consultant, and the founder of Gym Hookie. She has also been featured on Good Morning America. She is an Under Armour brand ambassador and trainer and serves on the board of advisors for Women's Health magazine. She also features her signature approach, which is the lean method, which has empowered thousands of leaders worldwide to adopt healthy habits for high performance, me included. Before starting her wellness company, Gym Hookie, Belgrave spent over a decade as a corporate HR leader for Fortune 100 companies like JP Morgan and Facebook. In her role, she focused on designing and developing programs to increase employee engagement and foster an inclusive work environment. Today, she fuses HR knowledge with her wellness expertise to foster healthy home, workplace, and community environments. She's also known as the burnout whisperer. Ariel will share with us how to pause on purpose so we have the mental and physical resources within ourselves to sustain the work that we're doing. She will also lead our movement break when we head to our workshops. So please join me in welcoming my virtual friend and now my virtual BFF and now good friend, Ariel Belgrave. Thank you so much.
Thank you, you're so sweet. Thank you. It is such an honor to be here today. Are y'all here with me? Yeah? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Huff, for the amazing welcome. So today, I want to talk about the power of intentionally pausing on purpose. As we thrive in our careers, build success, and work to make a huge impact as community leaders, we have a lot of community leaders in the house, right? Yeah, rep. You know, you're doing a lot of work, right? And the reality is when we're in human services role, we're at some of the greatest risks of burnout. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Now, before I move forward, the word pause. When you hear the word pause, what are some words that come to mind? I gotta make sure y'all are alive with me in this audience, okay? Any words, throw it out when you hear pause. Rest. Stop. Freeze. Slow down, reflection. Oh, y'all know what pause means. Okay, so as I go through this, I want you to keep that top of mind when you think of your well-being, okay? Now let's see how I'm gonna work this clicker. Am I doing this right? It's me. I'm the villain. Okay. So one of my favorite quotes by Maya Angelou is, "They see my glory, but they don't know my story." And I couldn't think of a better quote to kick this off with, because before Ari, the Under Armour athlete, before Ari, Gym Hookie on Instagram, before I went all in on fitness and wellness, as Dr. Huff mentioned, I spent a decade in HR, focusing on employee engagement, employee experience. And while in those 10 years I achieved a whole lot that I'm very proud of, there were also some challenges that I had. And I want to use this moment to be vulnerable and share a little bit about my story. Y'all good with that? Yeah. Okay. See, I like interaction. I got to make sure you're all alive out here. Okay, so let's take it back to 2015. I'm 4 years out of college, 26 years old, working in investment banking. I'd say killing the game. Work investment banking, and I moved up the corporate ladder very fast. So I was managing teams across 40 countries. I'd say, running the show, saving the company millions of dollars. And on the outside, people will see a successful leader. Ari's killing the game. Now, granted, I did achieve a lot. But underneath, oops. There's a slide missing, but here's what I'll say. Underneath all of the recognition, underneath all of the impact, I'd like to say I was physically and mentally exhausted, a shiny apple with a rotten core. So what that looked like was me getting very little sleep or no sleep at all. I felt like I always had a lot of tabs open in my mind because there was always more to do, always work to do, always someone to take care of. And for me, I'd say a recovering people pleaser. So I was asked often to do a lot with a little bit of resource, and I always said yes. I took a lot of pride in getting things done. That's just how I roll. But that led me to burning out. I had an email inbox that was overflowing. I had tons of meetings that didn't allow me to start the workday until later in the day, which meant I was working really late. So what that meant for me was that I was at a point of extreme exhaustion. Now, when I think of my formula for success, I'm a first gen, so I know that was mentioned in the talk prior. First gen, I watched my parents who are immigrants hustle and work hard, the grind, and navigate this world and life with very little resources. So that's what was instilled in me. I'm the first and only to go to college in my family. So my formula for success is hard work, we gonna work hard, we gonna hustle, and that's what will bring me success. And which it did. And what does success look like for me, or in general? Getting promotions, getting visibility for the work that I'm doing, getting recognition by the senior leaders for the work that I'm putting out into the world or the company, and getting very high performance raises, which got me more pay. I went out of order here, because this is where I thought I was supposed to be. But even with all that, that measure of success was one that I found to be very hard, especially when I got to a point where I'm physically exhausted. So what led me to the point of being that shiny apple with a rotten core and being extremely exhausted physically and mentally? On the personal front, I was always putting myself last. I was pouring into people that weren't pouring into me. Can anyone relate? Give me a as I say these, because I know, if you know, you know. Being the go-to person for emotional support, the dump. We're about to be church in here. Trying to keep the peace by silencing yourself. So I mentioned I'm a recovering people pleaser. For me, I don't do drama, I don't do conflicts. I found myself silencing my desires and needs just to keep the peace and making everyone around me happy. I heard a Having one-sided relationships and friendships where I was giving but not getting much in return to fill up my own cup. And trying to save people from themselves. Now, you know that's a full-time job in itself, right? Okay. Exhaustion. So that formula for success, hustling, hard work, I realized was actually a recipe for burning out. Some things needed to change. Now, I want to talk about burnout because oftentimes when we think about burnout or we hear about burnout, we hear the word exhaustion. And that is absolutely true to a certain extent. When you think of burnout, I want you to think about chronic stress over a very long period of time. Can't get burnt out in a week. Oftentimes, people are in a burnout state for over a year and may not even realize it because we're in this fight or flight for a very long time. And our body gets so used to these symptoms that we're either seeing it and putting it under the rug or believing that we can cure burnout when we go on that 7-day PTO in about 3 months. Side note, spoiler alert, it takes more than 7 days to recover from burnout, okay? So what are some things that manifest in our body that can give us signs of burnout? So I want you to think of 4 things: physical, emotional, mental, and behavioral. So some signs of the physical could be not getting enough sleep, your hair falling out, gaining weight and struggling to lose it. On the emotional side, maybe you're feeling easily overwhelmed, or you have trouble focusing. You're feeling snappy with the people around you. On the mental side, feeling like everything that you do is never enough. Maybe you're feeling a little bit removed from the work that you felt called to do and was excited about at one point in time, and now you're feeling not as motivated. And then behavioral, social withdrawn. And I'm not saying social withdrawn because you just need to set some boundaries and a rest. I mean that you just find yourself not being able to be around people, or maybe acting out in a certain way that's not typically you. And what does prolonged exposure to stress cause? So let's start with memory loss. Studies show that being in a chronic state of stress over a long period of time can put us at risk for cognitive decline. What does that mean? It puts us at risk for not being able to remember things. It puts us at risk for having trouble focusing and learning new things, period. And in the professions we have, we can't have that, right? We gotta be able to bring our A game. So when we're stressed, we're really not being able to show up for our clients, the people that we're serving in our communities, our families, and even ourselves. It could also, I will also say what that can look like short term for the memory loss is what I experienced. So one day I woke up and I didn't know where I was. And that was where I knew I needed to make a change. And it was short term. It was absolute burnout when I went to the hospital, and I lived in the Bay Area. So let me tell you, it was crazy how normal it appeared. They're like, oh yeah, you're just burnt out. Oh, okay. ER run for burnout, right? And it was so normal in the environment, working in tech where I was. They're like, oh yeah, we see people here all the time for this. And that became so normal. So for me, that's what it looked like short term, waking up and not knowing where I was. Long term, memory loss. Is anyone familiar with dementia? Okay. So studies do show that being in a chronic state of stress over a long period of time, research shows that it can absolutely play a part in the development of dementia. So we're not only thinking about the stress that's causing us now, we gotta think long term. Other impact is anxiety, depression, substance abuse, social withdrawal, insomnia, suicidal thoughts, amongst other things. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read that list, I was like, oh girl, you gotta get it together. Some change needs to happen, because this can't be it. We're trying to live long. We're trying to show up, be happy, healthy versions of ourselves, and enjoy the fruits of our labor. We're making all this money, we're making all this impact, and we can't even enjoy it. And by the time we use our PTO, we're laid up in bed trying to recover. We can't even fully enjoy it, right? So some things need a change. Is anyone feeling change? Yes, okay. So one thing that I learned here in my healing is that, yes, I can work hard. Yes, I can hustle. That's not going anywhere. But in order to experience sustainable success, there was one thing I needed to add to the equation. Self-care, yes, that's it. Now, I'm gonna talk about this word because I'd say I had a toxic relationship with the word self-care. This is what I told myself. Are you just too busy? I'm too busy. I'm young. This is a very Caribbean, I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. I can rest when I'm dead. Very toxic thing I heard a lot growing up. Anyone else relate to that? Yeah, it's bad, it's bad. I'm too busy, so, you know, I'm young now, my body can handle it. I'm too guilty. I grew up in an environment where I never saw anyone around me ever, like self-care was like, oh, woo-woo self-care. We gotta work hard, we can enjoy it when we retire. And I felt guilty knowing that I saw my mom work really hard, 4 or 5 jobs. All the women in my family worked 4 or 5 jobs. And with me being the only one to go to college, I also had a weight on my shoulders where I'm also taking care of my family as one who's differently positioned than others. And then I'm too strong. I mentioned that I worked in banking, and banking was a predominantly male, white environment, and I was not hearing my colleagues talk anything about self-care. So in my mind, I attributed that to weakness. Well, if I need to intentionally practice self-care, then that means I'm weak. Has anyone else ever felt that? Yeah. But here was the truth. I had self-care all mixed up, and I needed to have a mindset shift because as a leader, managing people across 40 countries, I realized that in order to be the most effective and high-performing leader, there's some changes I needed to make, and self-care was absolutely one of them. I didn't need to just find time for self-care, I needed to make the time. And I needed to rest in order to do the rest, because here's the reality, we're always gonna have a to-do list. As you check one thing off, guess what? There's probably another tab in your mind open or another thing that you're adding to that list. So in order for us to be able to function in the proper way and bring our A game to what we do, we gotta be able to rest. It's a non-negotiable. And then lastly, I needed to change my mindset, some of which I just shared, where I originally had this toxic relationship with self-care. Now, I like to say self-care for me is an unapologetic version of self-care because I'm gonna prioritize it and make sure that I'm doing the things to make it happen. So what were some things that I learned along the way? That leadership starts with leading myself. Self-leadership is a whole thing, y'all. Make sure you Google it if you haven't heard that word, right? In order for us to lead others, we have to make sure we're looking at the mirror and doing the things to lead ourselves. Because when we bring our toxic behaviors, right, like emailing teams 9 o'clock at night or on weekends, or not using your PTO or on PTO and you're messaging people, what message did that send them, right? The behaviors you have becomes a part of the culture that you're building for your team. The second is that my health and success can absolutely coexist. I don't have to choose one without the other. Third is when I choose me, everyone wins. My clients win, my colleagues win, my husband wins, my friends win, my parents win, my siblings win, everyone wins, right? Because when I'm able to bring my best, I'm more present when they need me, right? And I'm able to be more clear in the work that I do. And finally, I can love what I do. I just wanted to get a little workout in. See how that worked out? I can love what I do and still burn out. I've had very many conversations with clients who will come to me and be like, I'm burnt out, and they think it means that it's the end, like the career is no longer in alignment, in which, in some cases, burnout could be a sign that it's time to revisit your career options. However, you can still love what you do and burn out because you can love it so much that you're so dedicated to it, you're so committed to it, that you're not taking the time required to actually pause and recharge in order for you to show up as your best. Okay, I'm always hitting the wrong button. Okay, so as I wanted to share a little bit my story, and in my own learnings, I came up with a framework called the pause framework, and it's all about being intentional and pausing on purpose. Here's the reality. We're talking self-care here. Most of us know what we need to do for self-care. You know you gotta move your body more. You know you gotta eat healthier. You know you gotta drink your water. You know you should be doing the things that fill up your cup. But we gotta shift our mindset as to why that may not be happening if it's not happening in this moment. So I want you to think of a couple things that you may do in your day-to-day that you should consider doing for your body before I go into this pause framework. When your phone is dying or dead, what do? You charge it up. Okay, mark that word, charge it up, recharge. When your laptop is acting a little funky, something is going wrong with it, what are you likely to do? Turn it off and turn it back on. Noted. You're sitting in your car and it's making some weird noises, and you're wondering what's happening. What are you likely to do outside of making sure it actually has gas? What are you likely to do? Go underneath the hood, you're checking it out, maybe you're restarting it. So these are the things that I want you to think of: restarting, rebooting, recharging, as we think about how we need to show up for our bodies in a similar way. So let's go through this pause framework. We have P, plan your future. A, affirming yourself daily. U, unlearning self-care. S, setting boundaries. And E, examining your energy. Let's go through one by one. First is planning your future. It is so easy to see where we are now and be like, I'm good. I could take that PTO. First of all, I'm mentioning a lot of PTO. 50% of employees do not use their PTO. Use your PTO. It's there. 50% do not use their PTO by the end of the year for very many reasons, but I'm always talking about it because it's there for us to use, and oftentimes it's not being used. So when we think about planning our future, I don't want you to only think about your body in the moment as you sit here today, and which I think you still should, but I want you to think about the importance of investing in your health and well-being now for your future. Because here's the reality. The choices that you choose not to make when it comes to your health and well-being in your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, in some way you will feel it in your 60s, 70s, and 80s, okay? So I want you to think of that version of you in the future. When I'm eating healthy, this is for the future of me. When I'm moving my body, this is to make sure that I have my independence, right? I like to say things like strength training is the difference between your independence and the nursing home. You have to start thinking about how you serve yourself now in order to work towards prevention. As a matter of fact, I often hear, self-care is selfish, right? There's a lot of us working through that mindset. Here is my take on it. I actually think it's selfish to not take care of yourself now. Yes, you may have people in your family who are willing to take care of you, but don't you think it's kind of selfish that you're not doing what you can now to make it easier for them in the future? Yeah, it's true. And then finally, taking more rest for the future you, reducing that stress for the future you. So that is P. One thing I want to do here, I'm a huge on manifesting. When we think about, I know we MEC actually have, I had some conversations, we definitely have 80-year-olds in the room, but I also want you to think about becoming 80. How is it that you want to be when you're 80? What is that one word? So I would say I will be 80 and dancing. What else? What else we got? Shout it out, shout it out. Fabulous, right? Bright, 80 and bright. 80 and strong, I love that. And moving. Vertical. I was expecting this from you. I was absolutely 80 and vertical. Anyone else? Anyone in the back? Traveling, love that. 80 and grandkids, so that you're able to keep up with your grandkids. Yeah? I love that. So write those, if you can, if you have pen and paper, just write down what that one word is. And I want that to be a driving factor in the decisions when you think about the future version of yourself. What are you going to do to make sure that you can travel? What are you going to do to make sure that you are vertical? What are you going to do to make sure that you are fabulous and bright? These are the things that you want to make sure that you're prioritizing now so you can actually enjoy the fruits of your labor when you are 80 and beyond. Second is affirming yourself daily. The same love that we give to the people we serve in our communities, our clients, our kids, our partners, our families, our colleagues, we got to make sure we're giving ourselves that same care and attention, okay? We live in a world where oftentimes we seek validation from everyone else, but we got to flip the script and make sure that we are treating ourselves like we are absolutely enough, because we are. So we got to kick that self-sabotage, that negative self-talk about ourselves to the curb. We have to celebrate ourselves not just when we achieve the goal, but when we are making progress along the way for whatever that looks like, and just giving yourself grace, right? We're humans. Ebbs and flows happens. Things aren't perfect. You fall, you pick yourself back up, but make sure you're giving yourself grace along the way. U is unlearning self-care. Now, you probably may be looking at me like, all right, I know what self-care is, but maybe not, okay? Oftentimes, we say we are practicing self-care, but we actually can be self-soothing. What is the difference? Picture this. You are coming in from work, Stressful day. It's been a long day. And you're like, I'm gonna grab that glass of wine. Ooh, someone hears me. Or you're like, I just gotta book this massage. I'm stressed out. What is that example of? That is self-soothing. That's right. So what is the difference? Self-soothing are you reacting in the moment. It's reactive. It is a survival mechanism. It is you making those decisions as a result of feeling that stress in that way. How can we flip the script and actually make it self-care? Or what are the things that you need to think of when it comes to self-care? You think of planning ahead. You think of being proactive in your pursuit of your well-being. You think of prevention and thriving. So how would that look different? Well, if you have a busy work season, you can look to book that massage. You know what your calendar looks like. You can book that massage in advance, so that way it's waiting for you, right? You can make sure that you have your workouts on the calendar, so it's a priority for you and it happens. You can look ahead for 2024 and put those PTO days on the calendars. And it doesn't even have to be a full week. If there's a season where you're like, okay, say you're a tax professional and you're like, okay, this is when the busy season ends. Maybe there's a day that you should schedule after that so you have it for WUSA, right? So that is an example of just being more proactive, so that way you can show up for yourself. S. This is my favorite word, setting boundaries. Boundaries are a reflection of how willing you are to be an advocate for the life that you want. It is the blueprint for how you want people to treat you. Now, I know on the social media is the one thing people hear, it's like, just say no. It's not that easy, right? Boundaries are for you. It is how people treat you. And one question that I often get asked is, well, how do I know when it's time to set a boundary? I want you to look for moments of resentment, things that make you feel bitter. The things that you may go home to your spouse after work and complain about, or things that just leave you in your feelings where you're like, oh, this person did this and they're always doing this. Well, guess what? They're always doing it because you didn't set any expectations. You're the villain. It's us. We have to set that boundaries and tell people how to treat us. So one thing that I have my clients do, even when we think about stress, is writing 3 columns, whether it be work, personal, or home. And what are those things that may be stressing you out? Setting a boundary requires you to speak to someone. So who is that person that you need to speak to set a boundary because it may be causing a lot of stress? Is it your partner? Is it your kids? Is it your clients who are contacting you after hours, right? If you don't set those boundaries, then it's gonna keep happening. And guess what? It's not gonna always be happy-go-lucky and daisies when you set a boundary. Oftentimes, the people who are most upset when you set a boundary are those who've been benefiting from it. So know that it's not always gonna look perfect, but you're doing it for you, and I believe in you. Set those boundaries. Anyone feeling empowered to set boundaries? Yes. Are you thinking about what some of those things are? Yes. You know what it is. The moment I said resentment, you're like, ooh. So I want you to act on whatever that feeling was when I said that. Last one here is examining your energy. How many of y'all have a calendar that look like this? Filled with a lot of meetings and social related things. I'll start off with saying this. Just because you could doesn't mean you should, okay? We hear this word time management thrown around often. It's like, just manage your time well. And I want to switch things up and challenge you to think of it differently, because here's the reality. We can look at our calendars, which runs our lives these days, and you may have time. So let me give an example. Barbara has a colleague that comes to her and says, hey, Barbara, do you have 30 minutes for today? Because I really want to walk you through this project outline. Now, Barbara can look at her calendar, and she could have 30 minutes. But what I would ask Barbara to do is to look at the surrounding, what's happening around that meeting. What Barbara sees is that 30 minutes is actually the only 30 minutes that she has for lunch, to go for a walk, to just have a moment for reset, because her morning was back to back, And once that 30-minute is over, she's gonna be in more back-to-back meetings. So what Barbara would need to focus on is not just the time that she has, because technically she can look on her calendar and she has 30 minutes. I want Barbara to think about her energy. So not time management, but energy management, because that will give you a better idea of what you can actually handle in that moment. I want you to think of your energy as currency. You earn it. So these are the things that you're doing to fill up your cup. That's the workouts. That's going hiking, biking, doing the things that bring you joy, reading a book, going on vacation. You spend it. That is everything you're giving to the world, whether that's through your profession, whether that's to personally, and then you save it. What are you doing to make sure that your piggy bank doesn't get into the negative? And that's how I want you to think about that. So whenever you're asked to do something, I want you to evaluate what you have the energy for. Because here's the reality too, if Barbara took that meeting, is she even gonna be in a good headspace to be engaged with her colleague? Probably not, she's hungry, she hasn't even eaten yet, right? So energy management, that's the way to go. That was the pause framework. I hope that can be helpful for you for utilizing just how you think about being intentional about self-care. Again, there's usually a mindset shift that needs to happen and how you think about it in the long game. Now, I believe that I can hand you the shovel, so that's you knowing what you need to do, but the doing is you actually needing to dig the hole. So I'm all about taking action. I wanted to share with you a free assessment that I do personally once per quarter, and I have my clients do, called the self-care checkup. So I'll drop it here. You feel free to use your phones to access the URL. But what this checkup is allows you to evaluate your self-care routine, okay? The reality is when it comes to our self-care routine, you're not gonna have the same routine, for example, for all of 2024. We have seasons where we need to fill up our cups in different ways based on what we have time for. Maybe you're like, you know what, I can't move my body this week, but like I will make sure I am hydrated, right? Or I may not be able to go out dancing, but I will dance in my home. Like, what would that look like? Even delegation. So with the self-care routine, when you open it up, you will see a workbook. And the workbook has 5 different domains across self-care. You have emotional, physical, social, occupational, and spiritual. And what you will see under that are a variety of self-care tasks that fit under each of those domains. So here's what I want you to do on your own, is rate for each of those items where you are on a scale. 1, I can improve in this. 2, I am average at doing this. 3, I do this very well. Next to that column, you'll also see a question asking if it's a priority, and this is key. What I don't want to come out of this exercise is you assuming that you need to have 3s for every last one of those items. That's not how we roll here. I believe in seasons. I want you to be really thoughtful about what you need now as you sit in this. We're about to be in December, so it's a busy holiday season. So if you were to do this tonight or tomorrow, what is it that you need now that will make you feel good, happy, healthy, and just present with the people that you love and the people that you serve? What's important is when you go through it all, I want you to go back. And if something is a 1, you can improve it. And it's also a priority, then I want you to write in that last column, what is something that you can do to change? If you are doing it very well, and it's a priority, I like to say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I want you to keep doing that and doing that well. This isn't a case where it needs to be an overhaul of bettering all these things at once. If anything, I want them to be a mix of the things you're doing well and you recognizing that and prioritizing the things that you may not be doing well, but it is a priority right now. Okay? Is that fair? Awesome. I believe in you. I know it's going to be excellent. Okay. We're actually going to go into a Q&A. I hope you were able to learn quite a bit from this.
All right. Thank you so much. Let's give Ariel a round of applause. Not good. So we're opening up to questions. So while you migrate towards the microphones, I actually have a question for you.
Okay.
Because especially when you were talking about having so many tabs open in your brain, I think if you looked at you were like looking over my shoulder, my laptop right now, all the windows are open. And I think our brains are like that. So when you finally realize you're too busy, you have that guilt and things, are there like maybe one or two things that you do once you figure out, okay, I'm burnt out, I have too much going on? Where do you start as to, on that self-care journey, like what are one or two things you can do to start off to kind of release that burnout so you don't end up in the ER?
Yeah, because the ER can happen. So let's talk about the tabs open. Because usually the tabs is a reflection of all the things that you have on your to-do list. So has anyone ever heard of the Eisenhower matrix?
Yes.
Okay, so the Eisenhower matrix, I want you to visualize 4 quadrants, right? So you have the x-axis, y-axis, and then you have 4 places. When we write our to-do list, oftentimes we write this full rundown of a to-do list, and then our goal is to just check them off. But we're not being thoughtful about the sense of urgency and the sense of importance, because everything is urgent, but is it really? So for this Eisenhower matrix, and you can Google it, it does a really good job with helping you be thoughtful about what is urgent and important. So that first quadrant, if it's urgent and important, that's something that you should prioritize and do now. The second quadrant, if it is something that it is less important, I want to make sure I get my quadrants right. If it is less important but urgent, there may be an opportunity to delegate. And I didn't talk about delegation enough. Sometimes we're the villain. That's my word of the year, is we're the villain, right? Is there an opportunity for you to delegate something on your plate if you have resources? I know sometimes you think you doing it could be faster, but the reality is those small micro things that you're not delegating can add up to hours that you can save and get back for your time. The other is if something is not as urgent but important, you can consider having it as an item that you just schedule out, thinking about what the dates are, and then finally, having parking lot item. If it's not urgent and not important, and it's just something you have in your brain that you need to do, I want you to evaluate if it's something that actually needs to happen within the next week. And in that case, some people say dump. I'm not saying dump it out. I say put it as a parking lot item, as something that you can revisit maybe next week. So that is one, which is coming to terms with what that to-do list looks like. The other is to avoid burnout, really recognizing what is stressing you out in this moment. Only you know that. So I mentioned the kind of the 3 columns that you can write, where you are actively sitting down and writing the things that are stressing you out, and what are you gonna do about it? What change needs to happen? Because it's a vicious cycle. We can use work, for example. You can be at a point of burnout, and then you go back to that work environment, and the very thing that may have got you in the ER or caused you to take that mental health day is still there. So it's gonna be a vicious, you didn't fix anything. You put a Band-Aid on it, and now you're back in that environment. So what are some things that you can do for change?
I love that. And again, the Eisenhower matrix is like life-changing, because you really realize there's some things that are not urgent and are not unimportant. That are also unimportant. So yes, you're very nice saying the parking lot. Those get dumped in the trash for me. One of the other things that I have a question about is the concept of self-leadership. And I think you're talking to a lot of people that are either in the medical field or medical adjacent. And I think many times we aren't modeling necessarily the best behavior for our trainees, for our mentees moving forward. Can you talk again a little bit about that concept of self-leadership and what we can do to lead more effective teams that actually value self-care?
Yeah. Self-leadership starts with self-awareness. I think for me, going to therapy is something that helped, because we may always try to figure things out on our own, but having the conversation and really being called out about what needs to change tends to be huge. So it can be doing things like therapy, but then also maybe even getting a coach. I don't know if anyone has experience having an executive coach here. Definitely highly recommend, because what you may be doing for leadership for yourself that can trickle down to your leadership within the workplace may not be working, but having an executive coach, there's also executive wellness coaches that help you bring together your worlds of personal and professional to make sure that you're showing up in that way. But these are things that you can be more proactive with. and seeing where there are ways that you can model good behavior. Have conversations with your team and understand where they're coming from, because their perception of how you operate, they may, I mean, I don't know it. I don't know everyone in this room, right? And the reality is we may have our own faults on what self-care looks like for us, and we may have the best of intentions. We may want to work hard and check off boxes so our teams can have successes and wins, but what's at stake when we're just focusing on the bottom line for the business or just the community impact? You have to make sure your people can be good as well, so starting with yourself in that way.
I really like that. I mean, like, there's so much great talk right now about destigmatizing the idea of self-care, the idea of therapy, the idea of having a coach is huge. And I think in the medical profession, we're still kind of working on that a little bit.
Yeah.
Any other, I'm gonna kind of go through all my questions. So the other question I have is kind of the concept of, again, setting boundaries. So again, you're working with teams, and just as Dr. Greer said before, we're training up the next generation of medical professionals that sometimes have those bad habits of, you just power through.
Yeah.
You just make it happen. How, as the leader of your team, how do you go about setting some of those boundaries? So you mentioned like email. Are there a couple of like boundaries you could recommend for us to set to kind of model that behavior with our teams?
Yeah, I think it can really vary from industry to industry. I'd say for starters, having the conversation, so you want to focus on building a culture of wellness. So remembering that wellness is just not a moment in time, right? We have these months that we celebrate, Stress Awareness Month, and things that we want to highlight it in the moment. But how do you think about building a movement of wellness and culture within your teams, within your organizations? So when I think about, sorry, can you reiterate the question one more time?
So just talking about a couple of, we talk about the importance of boundaries.
Boundaries.
And just thinking about how to, like, what are a couple of boundaries we could set for our teams to make sure that they understand the importance of self-care?
Yes. So when I think of building a culture of wellness for your teams, boundaries absolutely needs to be a part of it, and you need to be the role model for that. So there's so many type of boundaries that can be set. I feel like the most common is the ending the workday, right? So the reality is you may be someone who works better when you're at nighttime, when there's no meetings happening, but maybe you can consider, if there's an email you're sending, to schedule it out so it goes out the next day if you're someone who just works better at night. So that way the people on your teams don't feel obligated to respond at that time. But I think sitting down and having the conversation with your team to understand what their values are. When you're onboarding another person, the reality is values may not, people work differently, people communicate differently. So when you're onboarding a new person on your team, make sure you're having a conversation to understand what their values are, what their goals are, so that way you can help in support of that, right? So if there's someone who, they're like, hey, I like to have family dinner between 7 to 8 o'clock. Cool, how are you as a lead gonna make sure that the team is respectful of that, and there's a recurring team meeting where you're checking in on people like, hey, have you been able to have your dinner? Hey, did you take PTO? Like bringing up things so it's a recurring conversation and not something that just seems foreign. Because if you don't talk about it, people are gonna assume that it's not a priority in your work environment.
I love that. Dr. Schaefer, yeah, I see you.
Yeah, hi, Richard Schaefer,
Hi.
Orthopedics. You mentioned, like, we put things off, like the PTO is 3 months away, and can we benefit from the planning of the PTO, even though it's 3 months away? Like, I'm gonna, spend a lot of time looking at, where I'm gonna go, what we're gonna do, what shows, but if there's any benefit of that, even though it's far off.
That's a great question. Yes, but I also believe that you can also have one sooner if you can evaluate yourself now and be like, ooh, I need it now, then you should absolutely probably be taking it in the next week or so. But long term helps, it's like having the light at the end of the tunnel, right? So when you think of the long game, as a leader, it helps to be able to plan that in advance where like, this is on the calendar, this is happening. How am I I like to say PTO is prepare the others. How are you gonna make sure that the others are prepared and time is given for that? For yourself, also remember that PTO doesn't always have to be 7 days, right? It could be 1 day, and you are not obligated to tell anyone why you're taking that day off. If you're like, I'm taking the day off and it's just for you, then maybe take that 1 day off so you don't have to wait until the 3 months. But I think having that light at the end of the tunnel, especially if you're coming off of a very busy season, it's very beneficial because then you're holding yourself accountable to actually use your PTO and not wait until your point of entirely burned out.
And I think we have time for one more question, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Dr. Huff. Hi. Thank
Hi.
you so much for your very inspiring message. And it had me thinking along two tracks. I think the most illustrative example of self-care is what happened after the pandemic, with so many people leaving their professions because they realized that they were burned out and it wasn't fulfilling them anymore, filling up their cup. So I think that was pretty marvelous that people did that self-reflection on what they really wanted their life to be like now and when they're 80, right?
I agree.
Yeah. And then the second thing you mentioned, it goes back to what Dr. Greer was talking about in terms of faculty development. And I think that's particularly important in medical school. And I know the ACGME has tried to put forth standards and limits on how many hours that residents and students can work and all those kinds of things. But I sometimes think that those are like check the box sort of like things so that you can pass the inquiry from the ACGME when they're accrediting you and what have you. But I do think faculty development is really important in terms of having faculty lead by example, but they really have to understand, and program directors really need to be able to understand this whole stream of thinking and doing and being related to self-care. Yeah. So I think that I would encourage all of us to sort of think through what we can do in our own organizations in terms of developing faculty and developing leaders to have self-care top of mind and to encourage that with their teams and with their students. So thank you very much again for your very inspiring message.
Thank you. And I loved everything you brought up there. One thing I will say is, I think there's even an additional layer when it comes to being a woman of color in the space of medicine. I've had clients who, for me, it was almost like the irony of working in the medical space. Most people would be like, oh yeah, then you take care of yourself. And it's like, no. Like, if anything, there's a lot of stigma and what that looks like, and you're serving others. So when is it, and there's always something happening, right, where it's easy to put yourself on the back burner. I love exactly what you said, and I think there's so much learning that needs to happen where it becomes the norm in conversation. So self-care doesn't even have to be the word used when you're having conversations with faculty. It is wellness and well-being and what it looks like to just fuse into your day-to-day. I know that there's ways to go on what that conversation looks like in the medical field, but I believe that by sprinkling it in small ways, it can make a huge difference.
And I love that because that's a perfect segue to one of my favorite ways for self-care is movement. And is dancing. So thank you guys so much for this time. Let's give Ariel another round of applause.
Thank you.